My name is Brett Littman. I am the executive director of the Drawing Center in New York City. The Drawing Center is the first organization in the world, founded in 1977, to focus on the exploration, scholarship, research, exhibitions on historical and contemporary exhibitions. The museum was founded by Martha Beck, who was a curator of drawings at the Museum of Modern Art. She resigned in protest from the museum in 1976, because every time she proposed an exhibition, Bill Rubin at the time, who was the director of MoMA, would say, "That's nice, we'll put it in a closet on the second floor." It was not given very much hope and or importance at the Museum of Modern Art, mostly because of the biases, long-term biases in art history against the medium of drawing. Martha, however, was very prescient and saw that in the late 60s and early 70s, with the rise of conceptual art, land art, earth art, that there were many artists for whom drawing was primary. It was not only an important activity to express their ideas, it also was something that they did not in support of something else. When Martha founded the organization in 1977, it was in a small space in Soho. Today, the Drawing Center remains in Soho. We just finished an $11 million US capital project to renovate our museum, and we now have 3 galleries, which we opened in November of last year, that are outfitted for the 21st century exploration of drawing. And that means that it includes both the ability to project, to use sound, to use computers, and to allow artists flexible architecture to do installation projects. Today, I am going to present to you a lecture that I've been giving around the world. It's an ever-evolving lecture that I call From Lascaux Caves to AutoCAD. This is taken from the title of Paul Rand, the famous graphic designer's book, From Lascaux Caves to Brooklyn. But I thought that Lascaux Caves to AutoCAD gives a good overview of about 5,000 years of drawing. And I call it a brief history of drawing. Obviously, we're not going to be able to spend 5,000 years today talking about the medium. The Drawing Center, at this point in its history, is looking at a new way of framing a question about this medium, drawing. For about 30 years, I would say our institution had a fairly defensive stance about the medium. And by that, I simply mean we wanted to make sure that people understood that drawing was legitimate, that it was a primary activity, that we wanted to present the best kind of scholarship and discourse around the idea of drawing. But I must say that 7 years ago, when I took over the institution, I really wanted to reframe the question that our institution asks. And at this point, a couple of years ago, I took Glenn Lowry, the director of MoMA, out to lunch. I had previously worked at MoMA PS1 and knew Glenn well. And at that time, the Rothschild collection, which is a very large collection of contemporary drawings, Leon Ferrari and Mira Schindel, were showing at MoMA, and there was a third exhibition in MoMA of drawing. And I said to Glenn, "Thank you." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Now MoMA is completely drawing-based." And he laughed and understood, of course, because of our own personal history and because of Martha's resigning from the museum in 1976, what I was kind of pointing to. Today, drawing is legitimate. The fact that drawing now, there's a fair that is dedicated particularly to this medium, I think means that the question has shifted. Not is drawing important, not is it something that art historians should be looking at, not is it something that galleries should show or artists should do, but I think now there is a new question to ask. And that question might simply be, is this thing a drawing? There might be 3 answers to that question: yes, no, and maybe. And it's very important for our institution at the Drawing Center to actually sometimes, when the answer is no, when my curators feel that something might not be a drawing, to more fully explore that and maybe to even make an exhibition about that concept. Our institution has never defined drawing as simply works on paper or by any kind of materiality. I think it's always taken a much more conceptual approach. And we have really, I hope, over the past 35 years of our existence, pushed the boundaries and the ideas of what drawing is, both in terms of sculpture, in terms of performance, in terms of other disciplines, and created a whole brand new dialogue around this concept. So today, the lecture, I hope, will be somewhat provocative. I want to start off by showing some things that I'm going to simply ask the question, are these things drawing? The first image is by a young artist named Sterling Ruby. This is called, it's a photograph called This Range, and it was done in 2005. If anyone has ever played paintball, where you kind of shoot paintballs at each other, this is a shield that one might use, or a barrier that one might use to hide from the people who are shooting you with these paintballs. Sterling Ruby made an exhibition at the Drawing Center in 2008. Many of the drawings were computer generated, many were made with lipstick or nail polish, and I have to say that even my own staff had many questions to the curator, João Ribas, of this exhibition, my curator, about why we were showing Sterling's work. Sterling came to the Drawing Center and made probably one of the best artist presentations about what drawing meant to his own practice, and basically he said that for him, he went to a very conservative school in Pennsylvania. He learned how to figure draw. He looked at a lot of minimalism, and he reacted very strongly against those two poles of his own personal education. And basically, when he thinks of drawing, he thinks of two concepts: the idea of immediacy, the simple act of making a gesture and making a mark in the world. And the second aspect is this idea of the mark itself and what that means. So for him, collaging things together on a computer is drawing, because in a way it's an immediate activity and it acts in the same way as making a line on a page. The other thing is that Sterling works in multiple mediums. He sometimes works in ceramics, often works in photography, sometimes makes large-scale sculptures. For him, this paint shield is about making a mark in the world, this idea of the primary mark that one makes, even related to cave paintings, putting one's hand into some kind of chalk or dirt and making your handprint. The next image I want to show is Len Lai, an early direct filmmaker. Direct film is a process by which one simply draws or marks the celluloid and then projects it from the 16 millimeter or 8 millimeter projection itself. Free Radicals was done in 1958, and we screened it in an exhibition called Drawing on Film, which focused on the history of direct filmmaking starting in about 1940 up until the present. What's interesting today is to think about the relationship of media. I have curated in this room for the Drawing Now Fair a group of artists who are showing in galleries at the fair who work in animation or in still animation, using drawings as the basis for their work. At the Drawing Center, we would be very remiss if we did not continue to explore this idea of film and how it directly relates to the medium of drawing. Len Lai is one of the great practitioners, and we are planning on making a very large exhibition of his works, which always started on paper, and then were translated into these kind of filmic shorts. And we will work with the Museum of Modern Art to screen some of the films which now have been remastered and redone. The idea of sculpture in drawing is always an interesting area to explore. This is the work of Gego, the Venezuelan artist, originally named Gertrude Goldschmidt, who emigrated from Germany to Venezuela. This is called Drawing Without Paper 85, number 5, done in 1985, and it's made with steel, iron wire, aluminum rods, and cable. For Gego, the importance is maybe not even the object itself, the sculpture, or she called them constructions, but it's the space between the object and the wall and actually the shadow that's cast. One of the most interesting things about installing this exhibition, and this was the first exhibition in 2007, I did not curate it, but it was the first exhibition that opened when I became director. The instructions from Gego, who no longer was alive, that it comes with these kinds of works when you install them, are mostly about lighting. And it's mostly about putting the object, finding the right space away from the wall. I think for Gego, the drawing is the shadow itself, and that's what's important. And that shadow is controlled by the condition of lighting that you have in your space. Obviously, here we're talking about a drawing which is ephemeral, which really doesn't exist without a certain set of conditions. And I think that for the Drawing Center during the 1990s and early 2000s, the idea of taking the line off of the page, in some ways, which is a very 20th century concept, was very primary to our own explorations. And we made many, many exhibitions of younger artists for whom drawing did not occur on any kind of substrate, meaning paper, or even for that matter on a wall, but they were interested in three-dimensionality and how drawing and sculpture relate in those concepts, with those concepts, and how drawing can actually happen in space. This is actually a piece of music. I'll turn it down. This is from Xenakis, the Greek composer and architect. The Drawing Center had made a very important exhibition of his work in 2008. I had met Xenakis, sorry, 2010. I had met Xenakis when I was in college at UC San Diego. He was the resident composer there. And in 1990, he made an incredible impact on me in terms of a performance that I had seen at the Salk Institute where he flew kites in the air, basically at the edge of La Jolla in San Diego. The sun went down. The kites were attached to computers, and around us were 80 speakers. And the sound was generated by the wind and by the kites moving. Xenakis, of course, was very, well, he was trained as an engineer, a civil engineer, and he worked for Le Corbusier here in Paris, starting in 1948. And because of his own background as an engineer, his style of making music, which he began formally in 1953 after studying with Messiaen, really was to make calculations, hundreds of pages of them. The archive is located here in Paris at the Bibliothèque Nationale, and I was absolutely stunned and amazed at the way that Xenakis had to think through music as a visualization. So before any notes were put on the staff, he would make very beautiful drawings and calculations that were related also to architectural forms. And so for the Drawing Center, it was quite important to show how music and drawing, and for that matter, structure and mathematics and drawing were related together. The idea of collage in relationship to drawing is not a new idea. However, it is an important idea for our institution. In 2008, I would say it was kind of the year of collage for us. We made 3 exhibitions where artists were working with the idea of not necessarily making lines on the page, but using a materiality and the idea of cut material as the structure for composition of drawing. This is a work by John Kessler. It is all made at Dieudonné, a hand paper-making facility in New York City that I was the former director of about a decade ago. And it's called Blue Man No. 3, and it's basically macerated magazines, wire, newspaper, and then laid directly onto wet handmade paper and then pressed. For John, he is basically known as a massive installation artist. He makes these kind of Rube Goldberg-esque media installations in which there might be cameras looking at you, very much around surveillance and the idea of the construction of the media image itself, and also how the viewer interacts with that media image. This is the first time that Kessler, in 30 years of making work, made any works on paper. And for me, what was exciting to show this body of work was that in some ways, and I think even John had to admit, that by working in the medium of collage, which I think he also viewed as drawing, he was able to, in another way, express the same concepts that he was expressing in his large-scale installations. Of course, again, we want to ask questions about the medium, and we want to also understand the relationship of drawing and the ways that artists who don't necessarily draw or are not known for their drawings think about what it is that this medium is. This is a video of a performance of Matt Mulliken. Matt is based in Berlin, but was in New York for many years. This is a reading of That Person, which Mulliken actually makes drawings under hypnosis. So he self-hypnotizes himself, and then he often makes a series of performances in galleries and makes a series of drawings on blackboards or on paper while he's under hypnosis. And the character is called that person. This is the character that he is under when he's hypnotized. We made a very large exhibition of Matt's work, which included some of the videos and the performances. He also did a performance at the Drawing Center as that person. I was very interested in the idea of how one could draw under the influence of hypnosis. Obviously, there are artists who draw under the influence of drugs or under trance-like conditions. And I think for Matt's work, it was absolutely fascinating to see the incredible freedom, the two sides of his work, the work that he makes when he's conscious as Matt Mulliken and the work that he makes as that person. And they are very different in their format and the way that they feel, and also, of course, in terms of style. This is a piece by the artist William Anastasi. It actually is a poured paint installation, and the process here is that he stands at the top of a ladder with a bucket of paint, puts it on the wall, and it makes a drawing, or it makes a mark on the wall. This was done for the Drawing Center and at our gallery in 2007. And again, this idea that maybe drawing is, if we want to talk about immediacy in relationship to performance, in some ways this is the same as making a line on a page. And I was very happy to work with William, who has been thinking about drawing for 40, 50 years, even though he's worked in multiple media. Some of you may be familiar with the Chinese artist Sun Zun. This is a video called 21G, made in 2010. We made an exhibition with Sun at the Drawing Center. We only showed 2 animated pieces and no drawings at all in our exhibition. And I think what's important for me was the idea of how Sun uses drawing as the basis, again, for creating animated work. The drawings themselves are quite interesting, and often they are sold as the kind of residue, but the main goal here is the animated work itself. The last work I want to show is by Vasi. This is a copper matrix printing plate from 1761. In 2010, I worked with the Calcografia, which is an archive in Rome, right under the Trevi Fountain. They have 25,000 copper matrices in their collection dating back from 1462 almost to the present. The idea for this exhibition was that the Drawing Center had never shown prints. It is one of the areas where we might draw a line in terms of the relationship of drawing and printmaking. However, when I had visited the archive in 2007 and began my research, one of the things that struck me, and if any artists have ever worked in printmaking, or particularly engraving or etching, one really begins to understand that the plate itself is a drawing. And I wanted to actually totally conflate the idea of drawings and printmaking by making an exhibition of only printing plates. In my exhibition, there were no drawings and no prints. The argument was that in some ways, and it was a very postmodern argument, which I have to admit that the archive at the Calcografia did not understand for several years. I had to go there 4 times to explain myself, and they were quite resistant to the concept that one could only show copper plates. Very rarely are they ever shown, and they feel that they're only really for scholars. However, my argument was that this is the exact obverse of what we think of what drawing is. It is not immediate. These plates might take more than a year to make, some of them 6 months, particularly Piranesi plates and other plates in the early 15th, 16th century. They're drawn in reverse, so you have to think about them. They're drawn basically backwards. So also there's a kind of mediated aspect. They're not immediate, like just simply putting a pencil on paper and making a sketch. And third, of course, they're not about uniqueness. You have to make the drawing and etch the line in a way to think about mass reproduction. So these were all issues that I thought were interesting to look at in relationship to this kind of work itself. So, of course, many people ask me consistently if I can define what a drawing is, or if the Drawing Center wants to make a definition of drawing, and my answer is no. I do not want to make a definition of drawing. I think our approach right now at the institution is more like a think tank. We're dedicated to exploring drawing as a specific activity related to object making that is not medium specific. And by that, again, I just simply mean that we do not want to define this medium by work on paper. We feel that there are many painters whose concerns are drawing concerns. We feel there are many sculptors whose concerns are drawing concerns. We feel that there are some artists that draw whose concerns are actually more related to painting. So I think that we live in a kind of post-medium contemporary art world right now, and our institution must stay flexible and open. I have to admit that I've gone on maybe 500 studio visits since I've been the director of the Drawing Center since 2007, and less than 20% of the time does anyone ever take out anything that resembles a drawing at all. Most of the time, I mean, recently several people have danced, they've sung, they've showed me an algorithm on a computer, they've showed me notations, they've showed me research. So the idea of how drawing is defined by artists, I think, has to also very much show us the path forward in terms of the institutional remit and the way that we are going to continue to make exhibitions to move the medium forward. One of the things, however, that I do want to point out, and this might be personal to me, is that drawing is often kind of mythologized as an activity that makes most visible the relationship between artistic intention, emotion, and skill. And by that I mean that there is this kind of poetic interpretation of drawing as the mark of the artist, and that is what's the primary activity and the primary interest in looking at drawing. For me personally, I think drawing actually, of course, I do like that aspect of it. I do like the idea of the mark itself and what that might mean, but I'm not interested in the deeper psychological readings of drawings following down that path. I am more interested maybe in the complex relationship of drawing to other kinds of disciplines right now. And as an example, I want to say that for me personally, probably the first contemporary drawing ever made is the Robert Rauschenberg Erased de Kooning in 1953. In terms of what we deal with today in the medium, this drawing, which of course is an original de Kooning that Bob Rauschenberg has erased, puts together a lot of the very complex ideas about authorship, about mark, about erasure, about the inchoate and indeterminate nature of drawing itself as an activity. And in many ways, I think that our program at the Drawing Center unfolds from the Erased de Kooning, or at least in the past several years since I've been director. So really, we want to take an approach to exhibition making that problematizes the accepted definitions of drawing. This allows the Drawing Center to fully engage the medium across disciplinary, historical, and aesthetic boundaries. The recent areas of focus for the institution have been the following four things, and this is not exhaustive, but I just want to point out some things that seem to be repeating patterns or themes. Drawing from source material, the idea that drawing is not about sitting outside and drawing in the landscape in situ, that maybe artists today are looking at photographs, at film, at other media, and working in their studio and almost in a mimetic way copying things. The idea of language in drawing, or for that matter, drawn language. In many ways, there's an excellent article by the French theorist Tissot, which says all language is drawing, all written language is drawing. And in some ways, it's a very important idea that probably the first time a child writes his or her name, that there are many things that come together in terms of the recognition of that, not only as a mark, as an object out in the world, as their own recognition of their self-consciousness, that the idea of what I might describe as asemic, which is a kind of writing that looks like writing but has no semantic content, is very important in the contemporary world of drawing today. Informational, notational, and diagrammatic drawings. drawings which are unresolved, which are about research, which are using forms of notation, music for that matter, or architectural notation, are very important for our exploration of where drawing is in the 21st century. And drawing and the relationship between technology and new media. So I want to show a couple of images from exhibitions that we've done focusing on the first topic, drawing from source material. Probably one of the most provocative and most criticized show that I've put on since I've been at the Drawing Center was the Richter Venetia demonstration drawings. This exhibition, Richter Venetia, who many of you may know as a relational aesthetics artist, mostly known for cooking food in galleries, began a project in about 2000 where he would look through newspapers, cut out images from newspapers of protests, and then send them by email to a group of young Thai artists who he found working in shopping malls, mostly making caricature drawings of people. So you could sit and they would sketch your portrait. Richter asked these artists to copy these drawings. So Richter does not make these drawings at all. He actually commissions other artists to make the drawings. He does pay them, so it's not exploitive, and he pays about $300 a drawing. To date, there are about 1,800 drawings that have been made since the beginning of the project. I think the fundamental problem that people had with this exhibition is when you take the artist hand away from drawing, what are you left with? For me, the answer was a lot, because in many ways this exhibition dealt with the idea of appropriation, and each artist, of course, of the 12 or 15 young Thai artists that he hired had their own style, so that in many ways the drawings were not homogeneous, and even though they were subsumed under Richter's name and packaged for commercial galleries or museums under his name, I think actually it told us a lot about drawing itself and about marks. Frank Selby, an artist, American artist, who was in an exhibition that we had called Drawn from Photography. My curator, Claire Gilman, and I had noticed that there were many, many, many artists who were working from source material, mostly political images, but they were not interested in politics per se. I think what these artists were interested in is the idea of taking an image which might have had lost its content in the sense that it had been overexposed or it was an image that we were very familiar with. And in order to make the image have some kind of personal meaning for them, they copied them. So they would actually use drawing as maybe the political act of re-engaging the image with some kind of meaning or content. So this is actually, I think, May '68 in Paris, an image that some of you may be familiar with. And for Frank, these drawings may take 4 weeks to 6 weeks for him to make. And again, the idea here is that although it is a political image, the political act is the copying of that image and making it into something that's hand-rendered, that the artist has to look at and work on for many, many weeks at a time. Richard Forster, an artist based in the UK near Middlesbrough, makes series of drawings, often of the ocean in Saltburn, from photographs that he takes, and often sometimes uses downloaded photographs that he finds on the internet. We showed a series of about 15 drawings of a series of photographs that he took of coal mines that are disappearing in the northeast of the UK. He then would hand render these photographs, and each drawing, and I've been to Richard's studio in Middlesbrough, might take him upwards of 8 to 10 weeks to make. They are totally photorealistic, they are totally labor-intensive, and for this particular piece, he also made a sculpture that went with it. So I think for Richard, like Frank, Richard's work is more personal, not as political, the imagery, but still the same concept of taking a photograph, something that for him doesn't hold meaning until he actually makes it in drawing. Ewan Gibbs, a third artist in the Drawn from Photography exhibition, always works from banal snapshots, things, kind of tourist photos that he might find or take himself. And then he renders these images using a very limited vocabulary of circles or slashes, Unfortunately, I don't have a detail of this photograph, of this drawing, but basically the image itself is made by small circles that are placed of different density. And so it has this feeling where it dissolves as you come closer, almost like pixelated. It's quite amazing. And he also spends many, many, many weeks working on these drawings, setting up systems. But again, this idea of these banal tourist photos, which then are hand-drawn as a kind of way of imbuing it with more meaning. The last artist I want to show is Gerhard Richter. We made a very large Gerhard Richter exhibition. Richter in 1964 actually disavows drawing as a possible way of making art. And essentially, although he continues to make drawings throughout his career, the drawings have no relationship or what I would describe as asymptotic, meaning it's always moving away from his paintings. So I think when we made the exhibition, very few American audiences, there was a very large show at the Winterthur in Switzerland about 8 years ago of Richter drawings. Very few Americans know the Richter drawings or have seen them. I think everyone expected them to either be these abstract drawings or these incredible renderings like the Richter paintings. They don't have any relationship to his paintings at all. This is one of the earliest drawings that he made called Mountains, and basically this is from a photograph of a mountain that he took, which he projected onto a piece of paper and he roughly copied. So he had no interest at all in making anything with skill. And I think that for Richter, he uses drawing as an occasion to deconstruct his own ideas. And so it's become a laboratory. Today, in the Catalogue Raisonné, there are about 600 drawings that have been documented, dating back to about 1964. And I wanted to show one other drawing by Richter. This is done in 1966, where he puts a pencil into a drill, and then he just lets the drill go on the paper. So again, for Richter, drawing is not about skill. It is actually a location or a way for him to experiment and in many ways to, I think, deconstruct his own ideas about painting, which of course are the more figurative paintings are based on photographs anyway. Richter is never painting from real life. And his abstract works, I think, are about process, the process of the squeegee. And so drawing, again, here represents a third avenue for Richter, and he moves very fluidly in his drawings between what we might say are figurative drawings, loose figurative drawings, landscapes, but mostly made by rubbing, and then abstract works with watercolors where he oversaturates the paper with water and then puts the watercolor on and then submerges the paper. So he's not interested in using a brush, and then he tilts the paper and makes a composition. The second topic I wanted to talk about is the idea of drawn language. This is the work of Serkan Özkaya, a young Turkish artist that I've known for quite a while. Serkan has twice worked with the newspaper industry. This drawing is from the journal, the Courier Journal in Louisville, Kentucky. And the newspaper allowed him, before they went to print, to redraw the front page of the newspaper, which then was distributed to people in their local paper in the morning. And Serkan then worked with the New York Times, and they allowed him in the art section to draw one page of the art section. The idea, again, of copying the mimetic process, Serkan was in our Drawn from Photography show, and his contribution to that show was to hand draw Claire Gilman, my curator's essay. So when you have the catalog, and it takes a second for you to realize it, the whole essay is hand drawn in the same typography and the font that we use. So for Serkan, the idea of drawing is, again, this idea of copying. He views himself as an artist who uses different media to look at art history, or for that matter, to look at media, the day-to-day communication methodologies that we use, and to copy them through the process of hand drawing in this case. We did an exhibition with Paris, the graphic designers, some of you may be familiar with. We have never really worked with illustrators and graphic designers at the Drawing Center. However, for me, I know a lot of graphic designers and illustrators who are doing very interesting work with drawing, and they are definitely going to be part of our program moving forward. Paris, we commissioned at first to think about maybe some of the hand-drawn fonts that they had done for poster work with their collaborations with contemporary artists, but later it morphed into a totally different project. It turns out that their art teacher said that a drawing was just like an ant walking on the edge of the visible. And these stools that you see here, if you can roughly see, spell that out. Each stool is a letter, and on the top of the stool is a specific drawing that relates to that letter. This was put in a small gallery that we had across the street and was activated by 6 drawing classes. MM invited Liam Gillick and other artists to teach a drawing class using the stools and using our space as a kind of performative space. We also made a catalog with them as well, which was quite interesting, that documented each letter in the alphabet in relationship to their ideas of drawing. We are working on an exhibition now called Drawing Time, Writing Time, and in that exhibition we are going to feature the work of Carl Andre. Carl Andre made many early poem works, concrete poem works, where he uses drawing as his method of displaying the language. This is from a drawing called Dutch Drawing. The works that we are going to show are the works from a series about Massachusetts, where Andre does a lot of research about a particular historical event, and then makes these very personal poems using, again, the idea of hand-drawn language as the format for the delivery of the text itself. This work will also be in that exhibition, although not exactly this particular piece. Sean Landers, an artist who in 1993 made a book called Sick. The book is basically all made on legal pads that he hand wrote the whole book and then published the book as a handwritten book. The installation of these works are very large-scale, full-wall installations of the pinned individual pages of the book in handwriting with all the cross-outs and the editing directly on the page. For Sean, I think the idea was not that he was going to sit at a computer to write a novel. He wanted to have that kind of freedom and every day just simply carried around this writing tablet, this legal pad, where he would continue to add on to his story. There are a lot of misspellings. It was never really correctly edited. And I think that he was playing around also with this idea always in his head of the installation part of the book, which almost looks like a kind of minimalist installation of squares or rectangles on the wall. So he wanted to think about not only the idea of forcing someone to read a whole novel on a wall, and the book is not small, it's about 300 pages, so it's quite a few pages to read, but also about, again, the idea of the strategy of displaying it. Mirta Dermasaka, a Greek artist, this is an idea that would relate to what I had mentioned before of asemic writing, something that looks like handwriting, but it's actually not. It's gestural. Dermasaka is often interpreting private letters, and if anyone's familiar with the work of Robert Walser, the great Swiss writer who did microscripts, he made very small little books, which only he could interpret. Now they can be interpreted, and we are also going to show the work of Walser and Emily Dickinson's handwritten poems in conjunction with this exhibition, Drawing and Writing Time, later this year. A show that I had worked on with Yüksel Arslan, a Turkish-born but now Parisian-based since 1958 artist. Yüksel, I called it visual interpretations. His way of working is that he reads for 3 or 4 years. In his cahier, he takes extensive notes about his readings. He might read, this is actually reading Das Kapital, and after that period of time when he feels that he's fully engaged and understood and digested the book, he begins a series of artures or drawings. These drawings, the colors are made actually out of his own sweat, his pigment, his blood, his skin, and he uses ancient techniques to make the pigments and the colors themselves, and then to make these drawings. This drawing took about 2 years to complete, and I'm very happy to say that Yüksel, who is unfortunately totally unknown here in France, will be in the Venice Biennale this year in the Arsenale, in the big show that Massimiliano Gianni is curating. And also, I think we'll finally have some recognition for this incredible body of work that he's made really since 1958 here in Paris. There is an exhibition that I worked on of Guillermo Cuitca, the great Argentinian artist, and I just wanted to show a quick little video. The exhibition that I made is called Diarios, and the exhibition was of this actual table surface that Guillermo works on in his studio. I commissioned Guillermo to make a small film of the working process. When I went to Buenos Aires to visit with Guillermo in 2008, I sat at that very table in the studio. I put down my name and my phone number and my email. And about every 6 months, Guillermo takes an abandoned canvas or a painting that he cannot complete, and he staples it onto the table, and then he doodles and draws on it for about 6 months. Then takes another one and redoes that process. In my exhibition, I showed 18 of these tables dating back to 2007 to the present. And what I was interested in is, in a way, Guillermo never draws before he paints. He actually draws after he paints. And he's only interested in the idea of drawing, again, as a way to maybe dissemble or to deconstruct his own ideas. But the surface of this tabletop itself, of the diarios, which he's been making now since about 1994, is the place where the drawing happens. And actually, this was the inaugural show for the new drawing center right when we had reopened. I really thought in a way that I wanted to make an exhibition about doodling, which is even below the idea of drawing, and to try to understand again how artists might be able to use this kind of process. And one can really understand a lot about Guillermo's work by looking at these pieces as this kind of diaristic, time-based work, which he only shows as a set. I couldn't just show one. You have to show all of them that are made over a period of time. So this is an example of a completed diario, and the title is May 29th through July 11th, 2000. And on that particular one, there was a list, I believe, of potential painting titles that I found in the corner. And I wanted to photograph that. And as you see, on top of a lot of doodling and mark making, phone numbers, my email, my phone number was on one of them. My friend who writes for the New York Times, her name and phone number was on one of them. So they are quite amazing as, again, a kind of personalized, almost diary of the ebb and flow of the life of an artist in the studio. I wanted to talk now about the third concept, informational, notational, and diagrammatic drawings. An exhibition that I'm very excited about coming up that I've been working on is I've been working with the chef Ferran Adria from El Bulli, the very famous Spanish chef, who since 1984 has been making drawings with his brother Albert and his sous chef Oriol, and they use that as the lingua franca of the kitchen. If anyone knows the El Bulli, the very famous restaurant in Roses, the style of the restaurant was that they cooked their menu for 6 months, they closed the restaurant, they would go to the atelier in Barcelona, and they would take 2 weeks off. When they would come back to the atelier, they would actually exchange drawings, not recipes. And that's the way they would begin the new menu and build that for the next year at the restaurant in Roses. I have to say that Ferran is really one of the most visionary and innovative people that I've ever met. And his archive, which he started in 1984, has every piece of paper, every note, every drawing, and now he's made probably 8,000 drawings of every dish that he's ever presented at the restaurant. Also, when you sit with Ferran, he always is drawing. He has to always show you something visually. It's almost as if language is not going to be able to contain his ideas. So this exhibition will be at the Drawing Center in January, and it's called Notes on Creativity. The concept is not about the idea of drawing food. It's about the idea of visualization and using notational devices to communicate and to explain things. And the idea, if I said to you, this is my grandmother's recipe for a cake, and I gave you a drawing of it, I don't think you'd get very far. So I'm very interested in this idea of, again, how him and his team were able to use visualization and drawing as a means of a communication. Strangely, Matt Mulliken's work also is very close to Ferran's idea, and it's been funny because I've been showing Ferran a lot of Matt's installations. Ferran also uses like kind of styrofoam boards where he pins his drawings onto the boards, and then he moves them around the atelier. This is a piece by Matt Mulliken. It's basically a bulletin board, and when you buy one of these, Matt selects from his archive a group of drawings that he pins onto the bulletin board, and then that's what you get. So it's a kind of random purchase in a way. You have to believe that you're going to get the drawings that you want. But I really like this idea, and when I've sat with Matt many times after having an hour-long conversation, he says, could you just take out a piece of paper? I need to make a drawing for you. That's going to explain everything. And then he will make a flowchart or a drawing of some sort. I made an exhibition of Greta Grossman Magnussen, a Swedish architect and designer, industrial designer, who came to America in 1948 to LA. It's the first time that the Drawing Center has ever made an exhibition of industrial design drawings. I have to admit my staff was quite resistant to showing industrial design drawings. I've had a little bit of a background working in the design world, in the architecture world, and for me, Greta's drawings really showed 3 or 4 different things that were quite important. Technological advances, the idea of style of that period of time. She was Swedish-born and trained actually in Konstfack in Sweden. One of the earliest women designers, like Eileen Gray, and sadly very much forgotten by history. Although she worked in the mass market, very few of her objects exist. But what Greta was really brilliant about is, as an architect, which she was also trained as an architect, she bought land in LA that no one wanted, usually land that had very big cliffs or on the edge of a hill, and she was able to design and engineer cantilevered houses, which she sold with all of the furniture made by her in the house. So essentially you were buying a kind of prefab house with all of the design, and now 12 of them exist in LA, but sadly we're losing those too. So I think industrial design is an area where we surely know that there are interesting drawings, and we will continue to look at those. Frederick Keesler, the great visionary architect, who primarily only built 2 structures, the Art of this Century Gallery for Peggy Guggenheim in New York, and the Dead Sea Scrolls, wow, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the name of it. In Tel Aviv, there's the building, the Shrine of the Book, where the Dead Sea Scrolls are. Keesler was an architect who only drew primarily, and he was developing the Endless House for more than 40 years, which essentially is this kind of egg form. And we were very, very fascinated by his early drawings of lighting conditions, installations of art. And we made a very special installation. Sorry, this image is very distorted, but we made a big table with no work on the wall, and we called it the Endless Table, and displayed all of the work in this vitrine, because the works, I didn't want to frame anything, and I wanted to have this experience of almost a filmic read of Keesler's work from about 1928 to the mid-60s. I had made an exhibition with Cooper Union of Paul Rudolph's Lower Manhattan Expressway. This was probably the most maligned large-scale urban planning project ever designed. Rudolph would have taken down half of downtown to create, based on actually Robert Moses's also very maligned original plan to connect the east side and the west side. This project, of course, never came to fruition, but the only way, I think, for Rudolph to even explain or to begin to present to the local city government his proposal was to draw it. This is looking down Delancey Street to the Williamsburg Bridge. The drawings are quite futuristic, and I made an exhibition using the archive of the Library of Congress, and I'm both happy and sad to say that I was the first person in 30 years to go and to look at this work at that archive, and I worked with their archivist for about a year documenting, and now this work is, about 400 works are available to the public due to the research that we had done. Last, I want to show 2 drawings from Xenakis. This is the staging drawing for Terra Tector, a piece in which the musicians are displayed around, not on a proscenium stage, but actually interacting with the audience. And in a way, the notations are about the kind of positioning of the sound field that they would be producing. The audience was expected to kind of walk through or to sit in different areas next to the musicians. And this is actually the working drawing for Terra Tector that I found in the BNF, which is part of about 100 pages of actual mathematical calculations that Xenakis is doing in order to develop the music, actually, the composed score itself. So lastly, drawing and technology. Sorry, let's see if this will... This is the work of Robert Breer. Some of you may be familiar with him. Breer has a relationship to Paris. This is a very early direct film called Blazes. And I think that for me, Breer is a very interesting character in the relationship between drawing and technology. He also had these machines, these kinds of pods that would move around and make drawings. And so the idea of kinetic sculpture, the idea of like ANT, like the Art and Technology Group in the United States, that he was somewhat loosely affiliated with, the idea of using film as a medium to display drawings. And these drawings often come on little index cards. So for a museum in the UK that I collaborate with, we were able to buy the actual cards and the 16mm film. And we showed that in an exhibition about drawing. Another show that we did was called Fax. We were very interested in the idea of the fax machine as a machine that draws. We invited about 200 artists to fax drawings to us every day, and they were collected both on the wall and in a notebook. The show has now traveled to 35 different venues around the world. Each venue gets to invite 10 more artists to fax in their drawings. And it's traveled by ICI, International Curators, well, ICI, we'll leave it at that. This is a piece by Olaf Westphalen called Smoke Signals, and basically what he's teaching you to do is how to put a fax machine on fire. If you were to continuously fax this looped drawing of the fire. And so we got some really great and very funny responses. This is a fax by Jack Witten, an artist who was one of the original IBM technology artists in 1972. Jack worked with the early Xerox machines and made a series of drawings in 1972 using only the toner of the Xerox machine as the medium itself. This is a faxed toner drawing, basically, to us. We recently just finished a large exhibition of Alexander Singh's work. Some of you may also be familiar with Alexander. He had a show at the Palais de Tokyo. Alexander's work was called The Pledge. And basically, this project was the culmination of 7 interviews that he did with different practitioners, both in the film world, neurobiologists, and also Marc-Olivier Waller, and some other curators and artists. In this project, Alex interviews these people, and then he fictionalizes those interviews. So in one case, he's talking to Michael Gondry, and all of a sudden they're on a train going through a cloud, and they're also talking to Picasso. So as you read the transcript, the first thing you understand is that it's not a one-to-one relationship of the real interview. The next thing that Alex does is he spends time visualizing these interviews. So he uses a lot of computer searches, finds old books, and he begins to make collages that he draws on, scans into his computer, outputs again, draws on that again, or adds more work until he finds a body or a Rolodex of visual images that he feels represents his own feelings about the interview, and maybe a kind of graphic marker, a visual marker of the idea of what language might look like when we see it. The third step in the process is to spatialize these interviews. And for our installation, he built a series of walls, mazes in our gallery. All of the work is digitally outputted. There was nothing hand-drawn except for small little dots on the wall, thousands of them that I had Parsons students making for 10 days, that connect up all of the outputted drawings, so to speak, in conjunction with interviews, with each interview. So as you walk through, there are 7 different interviews, and you get to see this kind of visualization. Again, many people ask me questions about how is this drawing. For Alex, the drawing is very important in this process, but it's not the hand drawing aspect of it that we're seeing, except for these dots. It's about this idea of maybe the metaphor of drawing as a way to visualize the cul-de-sacs and the digressions of speaking, of language itself. And the last thing I wanted to mention is this idea of maybe what the future might hold. In 2013-14, we're working with a series of performative drawing-based projects. I've commissioned Susan Afuna, who I happily found out from Susan yesterday, I guess, has won the Gerland Prize this year. Susan is an Egyptian-born but Berlin-based artist who's been working with drawing and other media, film, for quite a few years. In 2008, she had mentioned to me that she has always thought about dance and her work in relationship to choreography. And I have a very good friend, Luca Vighetti, who also is Parisian, Paris-based, and I put them together, and they've designed a program called Notations, in which Susan will make a large drawing on our floor, and then Luca has choreographed dancers to erase that drawing over a 5-day period. So when you come to the Drawing Center in September, we will have a 1-week performance of both making the drawing and then erasing the drawing. We're working with Rashad Newsom, a young African-American artist who is very interested in Vogue dancing. And what he's done is created a suit that the dancers wear where he can create computer-generated line drawings based on their movements. So we will do one performance at the Drawing Center and then output the drawings and then put that on the wall. And that will be a 4-day presentation in March of 2014. Andrea Bowers and Suzanne Lacey. Andrea is a young artist who mostly draws, but very political, kind of third-generation feminist in LA. Suzanne Lacey is maybe a first-generation feminist artist, and Suzanne is now 70, and she once mentioned to Andrea she didn't know how to actually make a drawing. She never went to art school. So we're going to hold a class for Suzanne Lacey to learn how to draw that Andrea Bowers is going to teach, and for 10 days at the Drawing Center, they will have this drawing class in 2014. And of course, it will be much more than just a drawing class. It will be a dialogue about many things, life, feminism, art, so forth and so on. Other people will be also able to join this class as it goes on at the Drawing Center. We're working with William Engelin, who is a visual artist who often works with musicians, and he makes scores called folded scores. And we've commissioned him to make a new score for the Drawing Center, which is a hand-drawn score that will be folded, laid out in our lab gallery, and then we have commissioned a percussion group to perform that score at the Drawing Center several times during the run of the show. And then Terry Smith, an artist from the UK, actually starting this week, will be in New York making a series of drawings called Capital Revisited. Terry Smith usually works in abandoned buildings by himself, where he might chip away or scrape into a wall to make a drawing, a very large-scale drawing. So we've kind of sanctioned him to use whatever he finds in New York City. We're not going to follow him into these buildings, but he will make a series of probably 30 or 40 drawings in the Lower East Side, which he will document by photographs and film. And then he will make one tour of these kind of secret drawings in these abandoned spaces on May 4th. And then we will make an exhibition called Documents of that project in June. We're working with Tomi Ungerer on a big show of his illustrations. And then, of course, more animation and digital drawings, working in our lab gallery with young artists and giving them the opportunity to really experiment with the medium. And we also have a series of programs called Draw Now, where we invite artists to go out into the world and develop projects outside of the 4 walls of the gallery that are interactive with passersby, or we do like kind of flash mob projects where we say to people, go to 39th Street and 6th Avenue at noon, and we're going to have some kind of drawing activity, and we'll send someone there to do that. And those have all been quite popular. So that is the end of the formal talk. I hope you can understand that the Drawing Center is an institution that's engaged in a lot of different kinds of ideas. I think we are very willing to take risks, and we want to have a much more fruitful and deep dialogue with drawing. I hope that this is something, you found something today or seen something today that's exciting to you. And of course, I encourage you, if you come to New York, to come and see us in Soho and to follow us through our website, which is drawingcenter.org, and or through our publications program. And all of our catalogs are now available online. You can read them for free on Issue. And so we're very excited about that as well. So thank you.